History tells us that the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki ended World War II. In a matter of days, Japan surrendered and the world stepped back from the brink. That's the story we've all accepted, the one we've been taught in textbooks and documentaries. But what if none of it ever happened? What if, in the summer of 1945, the most powerful weapon ever created had remained untouched? What if Hiroshima and Nagasaki were never reduced to ashes? Would the war have ended anyway? Or would something far darker have emerged in its place? The truth is, the United States had already been preparing for an entirely different outcome, a brutal, drawn-out invasion of Japan. And make no mistake, it wouldn't have been a clean victory. It would have been the bloodiest, most ferocious battle in human history. A war that would have claimed the lives of not only soldiers, but countless civilians. And it was coming whether we liked it or not. Japan was not on the verge of surrender, not in the way we've been led to believe. The message from the top was clear: fight to the last man. Civilians were training with bamboo spears. Children were taught to resist an invasion. Deep underground, Japan's military leaders were preparing for a final stand that would have made every battle before it seemed insignificant by comparison. The United States saw it coming. The estimates? Catastrophic. Some strategists predicted over 1 million American casualties. And Japan? A nation willing to sacrifice everything rather than surrender. If Hiroshima and Nagasaki had never been bombed, would the war have ended? Or would it have bled into something worse? But here's the real question. Did the bombings end World War II? Or did they spark something even more terrifying? The Cold War, the nuclear arms race, the existential threat we still live with today? If the bombs were never dropped, could the world have learned a different lesson? Or would we have found another way to create even deadlier weapons and push ourselves closer to the edge? So, what if Hiroshima and Nagasaki never happened? Would the world have been better off, or was this the only path history could take? History isn't just about what happened, it's about what could have been. And sometimes those possibilities are even more terrifying than the truth we've come to accept. August 1945. 6 years of brutal war have left millions dead. The world has witnessed humanity's darkest actions: gas chambers, firebombed cities, entire populations erased. Yet, the war is far from over. Japan refuses to surrender, not because they believe victory is possible, but because surrender is unimaginable. Generals, politicians, and even the emperor understand that once Japan falls, their empire, their honor, and their way of life will vanish forever. The United States faces a grim choice: break Japan's will to fight, or risk being drawn into a war of attrition that could cost millions more lives. And then science offers a chilling solution: the Manhattan Project, a weapon so powerful it doesn't just kill soldiers, it wipes out entire cities in an instant. The decision is made. Hiroshima, Nagasaki, 2 bombs, 2 messages to the world. War will never be the same again. But pause for a moment. What if those bombs were never dropped? No flash of light, no mushroom cloud, no sudden end to the war. Would the war have dragged on for another year? 2. Would Japan have eventually surrendered? Or would an American invasion lead to a massacre so devastating that Hiroshima and Nagasaki would seem small in comparison? Here's the real question. Without the atomic bombs, would the Cold War have unfolded differently? Would the United States still rise as the world's superpower? Would nuclear weapons have been used elsewhere, maybe in Korea, in Vietnam? Would the world we know today even exist? No simple answers. Just one moment in history that changed everything. Today, we explore what might have happened if that moment never occurred. August 1945. The world teeters on the brink of the irreversible. The atomic bombs are ready. Little boy and fat man, pilots briefed, coordinates locked in. With a flash, a fireball, Japan would have no choice but to surrender, and the war would end in days. That's the version of history we know, the story we've been taught. But what if that moment never happened? What if, at the last second, the bombs were never dropped? Perhaps Truman hesitates. Maybe he sees the photos from Tokyo, Dresden, Hamburg, cities reduced to rubble, and realizes the world has seen enough destruction. Or perhaps the decision is taken from his hands, a mechanical failure, a diplomatic breakthrough, or a scientist speaking up saying, "We can't do this." No blinding flash over Hiroshima, no mushroom cloud rising, no thousands of civilians erased in an instant. Without the bomb, the war doesn't end. It drags on. Operation Downfall, the full-scale invasion of Japan, begins. But this isn't just another D-Day, no quick victory, no flag-raising moment. Japan has spent years fortifying its islands. Civilians trained to fight with bamboo spears, every street, every house, a battlefield. American soldiers landing on those beaches wouldn't march toward victory. They'd march straight into a meat grinder. The estimates? Hundreds of thousands of U.S. casualties, millions of Japanese lives lost. And if that happens, how does the world see America? The atomic bomb, horrifying as it was, at least offered a clean break, one terrible act to end all others. But an invasion? That's months, maybe even years, of firebombing, massacres, and starvation. What does that do to the American conscience, to America's image? And what about the Soviet Union? Without the bomb forcing a quick surrender, Stalin doesn't just stop in Manchuria. Soviet troops land in Hokkaido. Japan, like Germany, is split in two. A communist North Japan, a US-controlled South Japan. Sound familiar? It should. It's called Korea. The Cold War doesn't begin in Berlin. It begins in Tokyo. The Pacific becomes a new battleground, and America and the Soviets face an even deadlier standoff. And without the bomb to intimidate Stalin, what happens? If nuclear weapons don't become symbols of American power, maybe the Cold War isn't cold at all. Perhaps it erupts into something far worse. So ask yourself, was Hiroshima inevitable? Was Nagasaki necessary? Or did the world believe there was no other choice? Because if history took a different path, one without the bomb, we might not be here to ask these questions. When we think about the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, we often see them as the end of the war, a grim but necessary act to save lives, a clear victory for the Allies, a moment when the bloodshed finally ceased. But history, as we know, is rarely that simple. What if the bombs were never dropped? Would the world have found peace? Or would we have found ourselves facing something far darker, something more dangerous than we can imagine, something that could have made the Cold War look like a mere footnote in history? The bombings are often seen as the final blow to the Axis powers, the act that ended the war's carnage. But there's another version of this story that offers no easy answers. Without the bomb, Japan's surrender was anything but certain. The Allies had already fought one of the bloodiest campaigns in history. Okinawa alone claimed 12,000 American lives, and the Japanese were nowhere near ready to surrender. They weren't prepared to give up. If the bomb hadn't been dropped, the U.S. would have been forced to invade Japan's mainland. This would have been no ordinary D-Day. Every inch of land would have been drenched in blood. The predicted death toll? Catastrophic. Over 1 million American casualties were expected, but it would have been worse. Japan wasn't just a nation to be defeated, it was a war machine. Every citizen, every child was raised to fight. The intensity of the battle would have been unimaginable. But there's a darker twist to this story. The Soviets were watching. Without the bomb as a deterrent, they would have acted quickly. The world would have split in two once again, this time between two Japans, a communist North and a pro-American South, just like Korea. Imagine it, Japan divided. The Soviets gaining ground in the Pacific, the U.S. racing to contain their influence. How long before the U.S. faced an all-out war in the East? How many more millions would have died in that proxy conflict? And don't forget, nuclear weapons weren't just about ending World War II. They were the foundation of a new geopolitical reality. Without the bomb in 1945, would the U.S. have developed nuclear weapons in time? What about the Soviets? What if the bomb wasn't used in 1945, but instead in the 1950s or 1960s? Would the world have plunged into an arms race with nuclear weapons being used repeatedly? Would the Cold War have turned hot, an uncontrollable, endless conflict? The bomb didn't just kill, it shaped history. Without it, would the world have spiraled further? Would superpowers race not just to build weapons, but to annihilate each other? Would humanity have survived, or would we be living in the aftermath of a world destroyed by unchecked ambition and endless war? So, next time you think about the bomb, think about its true impact, because in this world there are no clear winners, only survivors. What if the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki were never carried out? Imagine a world with no mushroom clouds, no devastation, and no lasting scars. What if avoiding those bombings led to a darker reality than we know today? The bombings are often seen as a necessary evil, the brutal end to a brutal war. The argument is that they saved millions by shortening the war and preventing a ground invasion. But what if this isn't the whole truth? What if dropping the bombs didn't end the war? It set the world on a path of endless fear. We often talk about the end of the war, but we never ask, what else ended? What other choices were lost? The bomb is said to have saved lives, but did it? Or did it create a world where life itself is a ticking time bomb? Those decisions, made in dark war rooms, didn't just change Japan's future, they shaped ours as well. If the bombs had never dropped, the war would have continued. But at what cost? Would Japan have surrendered after months, even years of suffering? Or would the war have stretched on in a way even worse than what came before? Now, consider a more chilling possibility. What if the Soviet Union, seeing the fight dragging on, decided to invade Japan for strategic reasons? The Cold War might have begun much sooner, with Russia taking a direct hand in the Pacific. What would this do to the balance of power? The tension between the US and the Soviets would have escalated quickly. And what if this conflict in Asia sparked a new Cold War, one far more dangerous, with superpowers on the edge of nuclear destruction? Then there's the rest of us, the ordinary people, the ones who never fought on the front lines, who had no say in the decisions shaping our world. But those decisions, the bombings, affected all of us. The threat of nuclear war has loomed over us for decades, shaping our lives in ways we might not even realize. What if the bomb had never been dropped? What if we'd never had to live with that constant fear? But what if, in this alternate reality, avoiding the bomb only led to greater global instability? Instead of peace, what if humanity was stuck in a continuous cycle of wars, arms races, and proxy conflicts? The Cold War, we know, might have been the least of it. Without the bomb, the war could have never ended, only transformed into something more fragmented, longer lasting, and more dangerous. It's easy to imagine a world without the bomb, free from its destruction. But what if this world was even more fractured, more divided, and more at risk of total annihilation? What if nuclear weapons continued to escalate, always threatening to push us to the edge? What if the bomb didn't end the war? What if it merely set us up for the next conflict? We've been told the bombings ended World War II. But was that really the end of the war, or the start of something far worse? The history books tell one story. But what if the real story, the one they don't tell, is right before our eyes? What if, in the end, the bomb was never really dropped? We've reached the end, but the questions remain. What if the atomic bombs had never been dropped? What kind of world would we be living in today? A world still teetering on the edge of war, or one where a different kind of destruction took its place? Would we have found peace, or simply prolonged our darkest fears? This story doesn't offer a neat, happy ending. It's not just about the past. It's about the present, the choices we make today, and how those decisions ripple through time. Are we doomed to repeat history, or can we break free from its chains? The clock is ticking. The world keeps turning, each moment one decision away from everything changing. And before you go, here's something to leave you thinking. What if dinosaurs still roamed the earth? Could we survive in a world like that? Find out in our next video. Make sure to hit that subscribe button, because the story is far from over. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. See you there.